problem. Marshawn didn't get that, but yeah, it didn't go around yet.
Oh, it hasn't.
Yeah. All right, so we gotta get the details of the money market down. We haven't done that yet. So that's where we'll start off today. Kind of the supply and demand setup for the money market. On the vertical axis, we're going to be measuring the quantity of money, but it's the real quantity of money. It has been adjusted for inflation, the quantities of money that are here. So it's the real quantity of money. Again, we usually think about M2 as the primary measure of money that the government monitors. The interest rate is going to be the nominal interest rate. So this is the nominal interest rate. In other words, we took into account inflation down here, so we don't need to do it up here. In the capital market, the loanable funds market, we use the real rate of interest. And remember, we had that connection between the two that maybe I'll do it this way. We did it a little differently before. The nominal rate of interest is the sum of the real rate plus the inflation rate. Or the way we wrote it before was that the real rate of interest, your real rate of return on your money, is the nominal interest rate that the bank's paying you minus inflation, which is just a manipulation of that little equation, right? So you can kind of think about it either way. That's the Fisher formula. So I like to start off with the supply of money. It is a kind of a choice by the Federal Reserve of how much money they want floating around. They have the power to manipulate the supply of money, and notice that it is fixed. So it's not upward sloping like our other supply curves were. And the idea there is that it's a choice by the government, by the Federal Reserve, to choose how much money they want out in the system. And then the demand for money has a familiar look, downward sloping. As nominal interest rates fall, people will choose to hold more money. One way you can kind of think about the demand for money with your wallet on how much currency you want to hold. Remember, we talked about how holding your wealth in the form of currency is kind of a suck place to put it, right? If you want long-term investment, holding it in the form of cash, tucking it away in your mattress is not a good place to put your money in terms of building wealth and getting a nice rate of return. So as those rates of return fall, then it's like, no big deal, I'll put more in my wallet, right? So you can kind of think about the demand for transactions is like, if I'm not getting very much, then I might as well just hold on to more of my money. And so that gives us this downward sloping money demand curve. All right, so let's jump right into a few definitions here. So money supply, MS. Money supply is the quantity of money in circulation. Again, it's currency plus checking accounts, as we've learned, and savings accounts, which is controlled by the Fed, or the central bank, using three tools. So we haven't spent too much time, we've talked about a couple of them, but identifying the toolbox of the Fed. And so we're going to do that now here and put this in thinking about the tools that they have. One of those things is one one that we're the most familiar with, they set the required reserve ratio. The amount of money that banks have to hold back that they can't loan out. And we saw the power of that with our circulating the spending that went around. Another tool we have not talked about is that they set what we call the discount rate. They set the discount rate. And this is the interest rate charged to banks for short-term loans. The interest rate charged to banks for short-term loans. So the Federal Reserve does not loan money to regular people, typically, although the financial crisis took us in a kind of a weird direction. They mostly are set up to loan to banks. And the interest rate that they charge them is the discount rate. So a lot of times the media talks about the Fed moving to change interest rates. This is the only interest rate that they control, that they actually set. They do influence interest rates by getting involved in the marketplace through the purchase and sale of bonds, which is tool number 3, which is the most important one. We call these open market operations. Open market operations is the purchase or sale of bonds to change the money supply. An example that you may have heard in the news media that you wouldn't likely know what the heck it is quantitative easing. So that is a new thing that's kind of come about with the financial crisis. Quantitative easing. And it's kind of a long story. I'm not going to get into the details now. We might talk about that more later. But that is the Federal Reserve going into the bond market. Here they're getting into long-term bonds, things that have durations of 5, 10, 15 years, which is unusual. They usually stick to short-term stuff. All right. So those are the 3 tools that they have that ultimately influence the money supply. So let's think about what an open market purchase does. So example number 2, this is number 1. Example number 2, an open market purchase. The Federal Reserve is going to go out into the marketplace and purchase a bond. What's a bond? What is a bond? Anybody got a bond? Yeah. It's a loan, right? It's a form of a loan. That's exactly right. It's set up. It's not necessarily to a bank, but this is how the government pays for stuff that they don't have money for. So they take a loan out. So what do? They draft a little piece of paper that says government bond, $1 million, paid back in 5 years, plus $50,000 a year worth of interest. Love, Obama. Right? He signs off on that sucker. And now this is a loan from the U.S. government, who, by the way, has never defaulted on their promises yet. Hopefully that'll continue. But they've been pretty solid at paying back their loans, right? So the first step of this process is that Obama goes and sells this to the world. Remember, we're going into the capital markets, so it's not just Americans, right? We could have the Chinese buying it. We could have anybody on Wall Street, on Main Street, mom and pops. Anybody in the world can buy this piece of paper. They just have to cough up $1 million. Obama gets the $1 million, they get this piece of paper. Then this paper enters the market, and so once it's out there, it can be traded, right? So start to circulate that sucker around. Go next door. Just start passing it. These are active trades. This is Wall Street. You can see the little ticker tape coming along, right? Bing, bing, bing. Trading, trading, trading. You guys are the private market, and you are exchanging the bonds. So you can take a peek at that. Now, I want you to pretend that I am the Federal Reserve. I am Janet Yellen.
Hi, Janet.
She used to work better when it was male chairman, so now this is a new thing. So I am the Federal Reserve, and I'm going to do what's called an open market purchase. So it's circulating around. Marchand is the lucky owner of the bond. Remember, it's traded hands plenty of times. I'm going to go into the marketplace. I'm the Federal Reserve, and I'm going to buy the bond. What happened to the supply of money? Marchand's just a private individual out in the world. What just happened to the supply of money in the United States? It went up, right? Marchand is no longer holding a bond. He's holding cash. And now he's going to go put it in his account and go get a loan and do whatever. The money's going to start circulating just like we saw before. So when the money leaves the Federal Reserve's holdings and goes out into circulation, that was our first thing on M1, was that there was a currency in circulation held by the public. That's Marchand now with the money. On the flip side, on a different day, I can do, so an open market purchase leads to an increase in the money supply. And over in our market, what's your prediction of what happens to interest rates if there was an increase in the money supply? What happens to interest rates? They go up? Which one's the Federal Reserve, the MD or the MS? MS. The Federal Reserve is choosing that. And they have now increased the supply of money from the open market purchase. Interest rates are going down. It's shifting, yep, it's shifting to the right. And so we're at a new interest rate that's lower. So when the Fed wants to increase or to decrease interest rates, they increase the money supply. And that will cause a drop in the interest rates from I1 to I2. And money goes from this level to this level. An increase in the money supply. Now, if you think about this, this isn't any different than what we learned with any other good, right? If we were talking about DVD players and we flood the market with DVD players, right? That's going to bring down the price of DVDs, right? So there's sellers, there's all these excess DVDs. An increase in supply of the good leads to a fall in its price. The nominal interest rate is the price of money. If you're holding on to cash, need my props out here. If you're holding on to cash, what is your opportunity cost? If you are holding on to cash, what's the price of holding on to cash?
It's not collecting interest.
It's not collecting interest. So the interest rate is truly the price of money. By holding the cash, you're not getting the interest rate, right? And when there's more cash circulating around, then money becomes cheap. It's easy to borrow money. The interest rates are low. That's the environment we're in right now. So the Fed has been pursuing this quantitative easing in the long-term interest rate markets to try to bring down interest rates so that people start borrowing money again for homes. That's the idea behind it anyway. And it hasn't been working very well. Some of their normal tools that they've used in the past didn't work so hot to try to lift us out of this recession or to kind of keep us chugging along anyway. All right, questions on that? That is the most important tool of the Fed. It is the one that they use on a daily basis. They enter the bond market daily to pull off their policy here, like quantitative easing. And so they're going in and they're making those purchases and increasing the supply of money. If they want to hit the brakes, the Federal Reserve now has in their inventory a bond. They can go to the marketplace and sell it just like any other private agent can. So now I go to the bond market to do an open market sale. So example number 3, an open market sale. I go out, I find a buyer, Marchand's over here, I say it's going to cost you $3 for this. Okay, boom, the bond's back in the market, the dollars come back to the Fed, taking them out of circulation. And then we've just reversed it. The money supply has been reduced, interest rates go up. So an open market sale leads to a decrease in the money supply, a shift to the left. And so if you want to tack on, I guess, that interest rate story too, with the increase in the money supply, holding other things constant, we had a decrease in interest rate, and here this would have led to an increase in interest rate. All right. Questions there at all? So next on our list, we've kind of done, is to make sure we got the shifters. And so we're going to talk about the demand shifters. Where's my sheet of paper? No, that's not it. I must have flipped it around. There we go. All right, maybe we should go over here for fun. So let's put money supply shifters. Money supply shifters. So number 1 is a change in the required reserve ratio. If the Fed decreases the amount that banks have to hold back, if there's a fall in the required reserve ratio, what happens to the money supply? Does it increase or decrease? So the banks, kind of remember, it's like it was 20% in that example we went in class. What's that?
Increase the money.
It would increase it, right? So it was 20% in the example we did in class with the multiplier. And if it falls to 10%, then that means there's going to be more money out there being able to be loaned out, right? So a decrease in the interest in the required reserve ratio leads to an increase in the money supply. Our next tool was the discount rate, a change in the discount rate. If the Fed lowers the discount rate, the interest rate that it charges banks for short-term loans, what do you think that would do? Cheaper interest rates, increase money supply. There ends up being some other rates that follow that. This is the has typically been the lowest rate in the nation. is the rate that the Fed charges member banks. And so there's another rate that is banks lending to other banks called the federal funds rate. So that's one, maybe I'll put that as a little aside over here. The federal funds rate. So I don't want to put it under this, but I want to just kind of make a the rate banks charge other banks. So rather than going to the Federal Reserve Bank, they just get a short-term loan from their buddy on Wall Street. So if Chase needs a short-term loan because they don't have enough required reserves to meet their daily amount because there was a big withdrawal, they can go to Wells Fargo and take out a short-term loan. It's called the federal funds rate. It's usually just a quarter point higher than the discount rate. Although with the changes the Fed's done, they've been real close to each other. And the Fed has kind of changed some of their policies in encouraging banks to come to them for loans. Probably so they can keep a little more control on them. All right, so that's the discount rate. And then lastly was the open market operations, which we just did. But now they'll be all in one spot here. And so what we already have up there is that a purchase leads to an increase in the money supply. And of course, you reverse the arrows and you get just the opposite effect. All of these three things are what we call expansionary monetary policy. That's a mouthful. So these are, whenever an increase in the money supply, when the Fed pursues that, we call it an expansionary monetary policy. So it's expanding the money. It's also intended to help expand real GDP, to expand growth. It's a stimulus type of measure. Sometimes it's successful at that, sometimes it's not, and that's part of what we're going to study as we add more and more detail onto this. All right, questions on that?
I see how number 3 can be reversed, but I'm wondering how to change our discount rate to be reversed in
Up here?
increase.
So if banks are required to hold back, if the required reserve ratio is 0.2, so 20%, and we change that to 50%, that means if total deposits are 100 million, they could loan out 80 million under this scenario. They can only loan out 50 million here.
I did that, but what about the discount rate?
Oh, what, were you saying discount rate? Maybe I misunderstood you. You're talking about this one?
Like an increase in the discount rate.
Yeah, it kind of discourages lending and other interest rates start to rise. Yep. Okay, anything else? All right, how about the demand side? So money demand shifters. What's going to make that thing move around? Number one is a change in real GDP. A change in real GDP. Real GDP is our income for the nation, right? Remember that old thing, GDP equals income? So when you guys, you can think about this on a micro level. If you leave college and you get a $50,000 a year job, I hope you do, maybe even more. That'd be kind of a dream, right? First job out of college, 50 grand a year. Do you think you're going to carry a little more cash in your purse or wallet or less when that happens? Like actual currency, you can kind of think about currency. Probably a little more, right? So you might carry a 20 in there, and now you're going to carry a couple hundred or something, right? So as income goes up, that's the way it looks at the micro level. That kind of blossoms up into the whole nation doing that. And so people tend to have hold more of their wealth in the form of currency and checking accounts. So an increase in income, i.e. an increase in real GDP, if the economy is growing and prospering and doing well, that will lead to an increase in money demand. What happens to interest rates when there's an increase in money demand? They go up. So now we've got, if we're sitting here at this spot, money demand goes up, interest rates start to climb, right? From the shift in demand this time, holding constant the supply of money just from the money demand. So an increase in the money demand leads to an increase in those interest rates. And so this is the shift right, remember. All right, number 2, a change in the expected price level. So I'll use this notation a little bit. PL is the price level. That's like the CPI, that index number, right? It goes up from 100 to 105 to 110. We measure inflation by taking the difference in that and dividing it by a new number divided by, or minus old number divided by old number. The rate of change of the price level is inflation as we move through time. So this is a little bit different. This is the expected price level tomorrow. So this little e,
that would be a change in the inflation rate, right?
Ultimately, yes, that would be an upgrade of what you expect inflation, not inflation itself. That's what we'll spend a little more time on this. But if today I expect the price level to be 105 tomorrow, and today it's 100, just to keep the numbers easy. So tomorrow's inflation rate, I'm expecting it to be 105. Today it's 100. What is the expected inflation rate? 5%, right? So now what this is saying is that, what if I change that expectation from 105 to 110? How does that change my willingness to hold money? So if prices are expected to be higher tomorrow,
you're going to save money now, aren't you?
Yeah, you're gonna want that money now, right? You're gonna spend it now, right? You want to spend that money today rather than tomorrow. If we start getting into Venezuela, where we got that 56% inflation, let's not wait for tomorrow. Let's spend it today. So I'm going to increase my demand for money today if I'm revising my inflation expectation tomorrow. So let me write that out. If prices are expected to rise tomorrow, then you will want to spend more today. And in order to do more spending today, you need money. You need money to go buy stuff. So you're going to spend more money today. That means you're going to have an increase in your demand for money. You're going to need to have some money in the form of a checking account, in the form of cash. That's going to shift the money demand curve to the right. All right, questions on that one at all? Last one, number 3, financial innovation. I know I'm getting a little low here, but I'll try to speak loud. You guys make sure, just ask me to repeat myself if you can't see the board. And financial innovation. Financial innovation. What sort of new things have come about in banking over the last 30, 40 years? Some of the things maybe you guys take for granted. but they haven't been around forever. Debit cards, good. What else? Online banking, good. If we go way back, 30 years or so, we really just started getting ATM machines, where you can go to a little machine and it kicks out cash using your debit card again. So we got online banking, ATMs, all this kind of stuff. Does that tend to have you hold more cash in your wallet or less? Less, right? So the demand for money shifts to the left in that case when we have financial innovation. So an increase in innovation, these new ways to deal with money and trade money, maybe even if we go to Bitcoin, let's go ahead and add Bitcoin to the list here, even though it's kind of flopping right now. Maybe someday there'll be some sort of alternative currency that we can use on the internet, similar to how Bitcoin's functioning right now. That's going to lead to a decrease in money demand. And so as the banking industry changes and evolves, that would cause there to be a decrease in money demand and put downward pressure on interest rates. So again, we're kind of coming back to what's happening to interest rates as we think about these shifts. Okay. Yes?
When you're talking about money demand, are you talking about M1 and M2 or just M1?
We're talking about M2. And for this part, it's okay to mostly think about currency. At least that's the way I always kind of remembered it when I was in your guys' chairs. So what's really going on is you're deciding to keep it in a very liquid form. So even if it's in a checking account or a savings account, it's kind of like accessible money. You're choosing to not put it into a 5-10 year investment, right? You're storing your wealth in a fairly liquid form. Okay? Any other questions or comments?
So M2 then, I was thinking all along it was just M1, and we're really talking about savings deposits and what we're holding in our hands. So
Yep.
But it's M2, so it includes things like bonds and CDs and money market.
Not bonds, but certificates of deposit. That's where the time deposits were. So M2 has M1, which is currency and checking account. Then we add in for M2 savings accounts, time deposits, which is those CDs, and money market accounts. All of those are fairly liquid things. If you want to go buy something, you can turn those accounts into cash pretty quickly, right? Okay, anything else? All right. Next thing we got to talk about is one of my favorite economists, Uncle Milty, I refer to him as, Milton Friedman. And he came up with a very important theory about money, something that really got him the Nobel Prize in economics, which is the highest award. So he's a Nobel Prize winner in economics. And this was one of his most important contributions, the quantity theory of money. And so the first thing I like to do is just kind of think of what we did in chapter 4. Nominal GDP was equal to our cigarettes, right? And we think about all the spending that goes on. All the spending we do as a consumer, about 70% of that 15 trillion goes towards consumer items. We got investment by businesses, brand new construction, government spending, net exports. So we're kind of thinking about all the spending. So Uncle Milty was sitting back thinking, we need money to buy stuff. So there's kind of a connection, is that there has to be a certain amount of money in the nation to buy that stuff. And so he thought about that equation a little bit differently and said, we could think about it this way. Nominal GDP is equal to the quantity of money times the number of times that money turns over. You remember when we went from Brendan to Lewis to Apple to all the times the money's kind of shuffling around, there was additional amounts of spending going on. So here, this big M is representing the quantity of money, and it very well could be the M2, for instance. We're just going to use it a little generically. But that is the quantity of money in the nation. And V is the velocity. The velocity of money, something you probably never really thought about, but it's the average number of times, a dollar gets spent. The average number of times a dollar gets spent. Here's all the stuff we bought. Here's the money that was in the system. Here's the average number of times the money got spent, right? So it's kind of just measuring that relationship. All right, so nominal GDP is, one way we've looked at it is the sum of everything. The price of chicken wings times the quantity of chicken wings. The price of beer times the quantity of beer, right? We add them all up. It's really price times quantity. And then we also calculated that PL thing we were talking about before, the price level. The price level was nominal GDP divided by real GDP. And so just to kind of think about these two pieces, whichever way you're thinking about it, P times Q, or now we can think of it at the macro level of PL times real GDP, which we also call income. So just for nice little shorthand, we're going to take the price level times real GDP and set that equal to money times the velocity. So this Y is real GDP, price times quantity. Still, the nominal amount of stuff we bought that year is equal to the quantity of money times the number of times that money got spent. All right. So this is sometimes, or this is referred to as the equation of exchange. The equation of exchange. And then I guess I don't want to forget to cite Milton Friedman here. So let's put Milton Friedman. And he came up with this in the 1960s. And what was going on in the United States in the 60s? Who was president? Who's our famous president from the 60s that gets a lot of acclaim? Kennedy, right? So we had the Kennedy era. The United States doing pretty good, right? We had a few wars, but in general, since World War II, we were on one of the longest booms in American history, right? So the United States is doing pretty well during or after World War II. And the government started to get bigger and bigger in terms of its spending that it was doing. And likewise, the Federal Reserve was starting to play a more active role in trying to keep that momentum going. And they did it through keeping interest rates low by increasing the money supply, that expansionary monetary policy. So then Milton thought about what are the long-run consequences. His main question, what is the long-run consequences of expansionary monetary policy? That was kind of his main question he was tackling. Like, what's going to happen in the long haul from this? We looked at the business cycle before. That was the one that took real GDP on the vertical axis and time on the horizontal axis, and just kind of helped us think about the ups and downs of the economy. We go through expansions, recessions, there's these swings of the economy. But the potential for the economy is where we kind of seem to cycle around, right? So this orange line represents the long run potential. long-run potential growth for the economy. And what he thought was that in the long run it's going to be what it's going to be. Because if there's inflation going on and everything on the shelves of Walmart doubles, but your income doubles, are you in any worse position? No. So the idea of inflation through just flooding the market with money like we were doing here, if the government goes out and sells bonds or buys the bonds, puts the money out in the system, right? Money's circulating around. Did we add anything real to the economy? No, we just added money, right? And then that ends up putting this upward pressure on prices. So if we go back to the equation of exchange and we look at the price level times real GDP equals the quantity of money times the velocity of money, what Friedman thought was, in the long run, this is fixed. So this is kind of a mathematical notation to a variable being fixed, is putting this little bar above it. So this is kind of fixed in the long run. It's fairly stable. And then he thought, is there any particular reason that the number of times money gets turned over in the economy, is there any particular reason to believe that that would be, you know, varying or increasing? And he thought, no, that doesn't make any sense either. If I increase, using this equation now, if I increase the money supply by 10%, what is the long run effects on the economy? If this goes up by 10%, this is fixed, this is fixed. Alex? By how much? If this goes up by 10%, how much does this go up by? 10%. That's the catch. So a proportional change in the money supply. This goes up by 3%, this goes up by 3%. This goes up by 15%, this goes up by 15%. In other words, monetary policy in the long run has no real impacts. Has no real impacts. And so he kind of said, well, why don't we do it then? And so that ended up developing the monetarist theory. All right, so back to our story. This is the 1960s. He develops this model, and he starts to make predictions that the 1970s are going to be filled with inflation. That this period of time of increasing real GDP is going to be matched with some inflation ultimately. And mostly people thought, oh, that's some sort of ivory tower academic. He's kind of goofy. You know, we know what we're doing. We being the government and the Federal Reserve. And so that's just one theory. You know those economists, they're wrong at least half the time. Well, it turned out the 1970s were filled with inflation, and Milton Friedman gets his Nobel Prize because he predicted all of that before it ever happened and before people really thought it would even happen through using this equation of exchange. So what his theory's called is the quantity theory of money. The quantity theory of money. And so what he said was that, or what this theory says is that in the long run, we'll talk a lot about the long run later, but for now let's just say a longer period of time. In the long run, real GDP and velocity are fixed. Or you can think about them being stable. Therefore, changes in the money supply, will be proportionately matched with changes in the price level. And so in summary, we've got the percentage change. Sorry, I'm getting kind of low here, Marcia. I don't know what to have you. The percentage change in the money supply, percentage change in M is equal to the percentage change in the price level, which is inflation. Right? And like we said, I change this by 5%, I get 5% inflation. No real effects in the economy. So I want to show you a little data. We'll see how Uncle Milty did with his prediction. So this is kind of how economics works. I can get the screen down, maybe. There we go. Touchy. So economists come up with these theories of a one-to-one relationship, and then we kind of look to see, well, what's happening out there in the real world? Does this really happen that way? If you were to draw a graph that has inflation and money growth, if we draw the percent change in M and the percent change in PL, which is the price or the inflation rate, what would that graph look like according to Milton's theory? Not perfectly horizontal. So I increase by 10, I get 10. I increase by 5, I get 5. Should be a straight line right out of the origin. A 45-degree line right out of the origin. And here's how Milton fared around the world. Each one of these blue dots is a different country. And you see as we go up, we get the real world being pretty close to that 45-degree line. Here's a blow up. These are some of the country names here. The United States is down there. And so Milton's theory turned out to be pretty accurate, that money growth and inflation go hand in hand. Here is an overhead of M2, velocity over time. And so he was right on this as well, that M2 stays pretty consistent. And so his theory kind of proved up. All right, we'll see you on Monday. Have a good weekend. The chapter 8 homework and stuff will be open for you, so if you're just chopping at the bit to get going.